Greetings, gaming fans, and welcome to Parasite Eve, the Squaresoft classic RPG for the original PlayStation. Now, this little gem was released back in 1998, and it shows. PlayStation and your low-res polygons. Now, before I start waxing nostalgic, let us get into the review, shall we? One thing I have to say right off the bat is that these cutscenes are actually really damn good. Well, for the time that is, and compared to the other cutscenes with the actual game sprites, these are great. I wouldn't go comparing them to Pixar or anything, but they're still fun to look at all these years later. Oh, and before anyone says anything, yes, this is in fact a Christmas-themed game. So getting back to the game itself, the main story of the RPG starts off with Aya Brea, an NYPD policewoman, going to see an opera with some dude whose name is never revealed, because the game gives that little of a damn about him. The opening scene has these two pull up in front of some opera house in a fancy limousine. Aya seems a bit hesitant at first, but soon the two leave the vehicle and head in to view the show. The play itself, which we actually get to see a small part of, seems to be about a prince who wants to marry a woman but is forbidden to do so by his father, the king, because apparently everyone who succumbs to her beauty dies in horrible ways, blah 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 drama. Then we get treated to the first cutscene. Well, technically we still haven't left the first one, but the animation here gets better. And we get to watch the actors begin to spontaneously combust and burn to death. Soon after, the audience begins to catch fire as well, and Aya and Dude Bro dive for cover. Soon the opera house is empty except for the main actress, referred to here as Eva, who is still standing on stage as the curtain above her burns. Aya, along with Dingus, are still here as well, though Aya forces him to leave before he too can catch fire. We then get to control Miss Brea as she runs up onto the stage to confront Eva, and are treated to yet another cutscene. You know what, to make this a little easier, I'm just going to call them poly cutscenes and CG cutscenes. So as I was saying, we get treated to a poly cutscene where these two have a nice little chat. So after Aya and Eva's brief conversation, we finally get our first taste of how Aya plays. For the first fight here, I decided to go with a club instead of blowing through all of Aya's ammunition on the first encounter, a little idea I picked up from back when I first played Resident Evil 2 in high school. Anyways, at the end of that first fight, Eva refers to herself as Eve for the first time, and we get a random flashback from Aya. Shortly thereafter, Eve takes off. One thing I'd like to note here in terms of gameplay is that the developers of this game gave no real indication as to where you're supposed to go to chase after Eve once she runs off stage. I seriously spent about a good 10 minutes trying to figure out where to go after that. Getting back to the game itself, we find out that after Eve went backstage, she burrowed through the floor. How she did this is never actually explained, and is now in the dressing room area under the Opera House stage. Here we get the option of either just immediately jumping down into the hole, or going back out of the building to talk with the paramedics and the backup that arrived. I chose to go talk with those guys, and I found out pretty quickly that the three gentlemen who are now standing there were none other than one-liners. Now, for those of you who have never played an RPG before, allow me to try and explain. You see, in these games, they usually have your main character or characters who go around in a world and do cool stuff, and usually while they're doing that stuff, they will run into NPCs. That's non-player controlled characters, for those who don't know. And those NPCs usually come in one of three different flavors that I'm personally aware of. And those flavors are your standard guy who gives/sells you items and stuff, your characters who have a few randomly generated lines of dialogue, and then you have your characters who only have one line of dialogue, which they will gladly repeat to you over and over again. These last ones are what I like to call the one-liners.
Does anything seem strange to you?
I like swords.
Welcome to Corneria.
I like swords.
Welcome to Corneria.
I like swords.
Welcome.
So once you go down into the gigantic hole in the floor, you get to experience one of Aya's polygonal cutscene hallucinations, as she sees a little girl in a blue-green medical gown standing before her, who, when asked if she's alright, promptly runs through the door in front of you and disappears. After you enter said door yourself, you run into your second encounter. This time, however, instead of being Eva, or Eve, you get to watch a CG cutscene of, well, this. As you could have probably guessed, since this is really early on in the game, the fight is pretty dang easy and ends fairly quickly after only a few short minutes. Then we get to explore more of this mysterious part of the underground hallway, and enter into one of the dressing rooms where there are currently two burned bodies laying still and motionless on the ground. Motionless, that is, until you open a couple of the lockers. Then the one closest to the camera begins to twitch. Aya briefly gets to speak with her before she succumbs to her injuries, and we find out that Eva, or Eve's real name is Melissa? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold on there, sister. First you're telling me her name is Eva. Then she tells me her name is Eve. And now you're telling me it's Melissa? Game. Just pick a name and stick with it. So after that little bit of mental fornication, we get to explore a bit more and find a guy in a clown costume in one of the other rooms. This unfortunate sod runs off and almost immediately lets out a scream of agony. You go to chase after him and run into another encounter, which, given that this is an RPG, will happen a lot as the game goes on. Soon after, we find the dude burned to a crisp at the end of the hall. Sorry to interrupt, but a little tip for anyone attempting to play this on a PS2. You need to use a PS1 memory card in order to save your game. Now, this may just be a common sense thing, but I wound up spending about 10 minutes trying to get one of my PS2 memory cards to work before my roommate reminded me about this little fact. The more you know. Not the smartest thing I've ever done. So, yeah. Moving on. In another one of the rooms, you find Eva Evalissa's diary and find out that she was taking a lot of pills for some reason and was totally obsessed with getting the lead role in the opera. After that, we get to explore a bit more and find the woman herself in a rehearsal hall playing a piano. At this point, the game finally settles on a name for her as Eve finally takes full control over Melissa, a fact that we are only clued into by a brief conversation she has with herself. She then undergoes the first of many transformations, and we get our second fight with her. The battle is over fairly easily. I literally beat her with the club, and she gets taken down pretty easily. Which isn't a bad thing at all in my opinion, since, again, I'm not too good at these kinds of games, and she takes off yet again, leaving the player time to run around and explore a bit. This time, though, she goes through the floor behind the piano and drops down into the sewer. Now, something that almost always bugs me about RPGs is the level grinding aspect. Having to scour every area of the game to find and fight every single last baddie to gain enough experience points to reach a high enough level to beat the upcoming bosses, blah blah blah. In this one, however, the game is nice enough to throw baddies at you only when you need to reach a higher level, which I believe is what a good RPG is supposed to do. I'm looking at you, Super Mario RPG. Now, something that I found to be pretty entertaining is that while I was playing through day one using only the club, after each and every battle with the rats and frogs and birds, an animation of Aya cocking her gun would play, like the game just assumes that I'm using the gun. There's a couple of other interesting little errors like that in the game, but I'll talk about them as I get to them. Getting back to the game again, after a few minor baddie battles, we run across Eve again, standing at a barred-off section of the tunnels. You run up to her, and, after some more brief dialogue, the third battle with her ensues. Or so one would think. Instead, she just turns into a goopy blob of mitochondria and runs away. I'm not exactly sure what happens directly after during the CG cutscene, since my copy of the game began glitching hard after that, to the point where I had to shut off the game and try it again for my last save. And then again. But upon my third try, I finally got it to work through the scratch or whatever was wrong with the disc, and I got to finally see the next boss, which was this totally radical looking alligator crocodile thing. Oh, so sweet. And this was also my first introduction into characters with multiple targets on them. This guy taught me pretty quickly that I should stop using the club on everything and whip out my gun to start dealing some long-range damage. This was also the point where I had to do a bit of level grinding for the first time. So after beating that thing, we get treated to another lovely poly cutscene where we are first introduced to Aya's partner Daniel, a badass with a porn stash who don't take no crap from nobody, as evidenced by how he reacts to a reporter who is trying to hassle Aya as she's leaving the opera house, which turns out to be Carnegie Hall. Daniel straight up decks the guy to the ground, like a boss! After a moment or so, the reporter gets back up and starts asking the cameraman whether or not he got that all on tape, which brings me to another thing that I like about this game. Most of the dialogue is written like something William Shatner would have said, with brief bursts of fully capitalized words mixed in with lowercase ones. Regardless, after that Daniel drives our heroine back to the police station where Day 2 Fusion starts. And this is where I'm going to have to cut this one off, since I'm not sure how far over the 20-minute limit I'm allowed to go. So thank you everybody so much for watching. I hope you all are enjoying this little series so far, and have yourselves a merry little Christmas. Or happy Hanukkah, or, whatever you celebrate. Or not. Regardless, cowabunga, and I'll see y'all in the next part. Peace. Ho, ho, ho.